Thank you for joining NextLabs. Today we'll be discussing Teamcenter Digital Rights Management in the area of extended enterprise. The environment overview is as follows. There are 3 companies involved: Acme US, Offshore Design Center Acme India LLC, and offshore outsource partner Acme China. They are all working on a transmission managed by Acme US. Acme China is outsourced for the transmission case manufacturing from the shared protected data set. Acme China can only access the transmission case design. Acme India LLC is outsourced for the controlled subassembly of this transmission from the shared protected data set. Acme India LLC can only access the transmission control subassembly design. Acme US headquarters from the shared protected data set can access all the data, including the case, the control assembly, and everything else that's part of this assembly. Under the 3 companies, you have users Ed from the US, Jin from China, and Sandeep from India. The classification is based on the access to those files that has been classified within Teamcenter for each of the parts and the overall assembly. We'll now take a look at the users that are defined within Active Directory. In this case, we have Ed, Steve, Sandeep, Sanjay, and Jin. So here we've defined the user attributes that will be used within policy to make decisions on what they can and can't see of that transmission assembly. Next, we will take a look at SkyDRM from the system's admin point of view. In this case, we're looking at the dashboard. And here we will go in and look at the user attribute mapping. This will show us what we've selected as far as the 5 attributes that we're going to be using to determine the access by those users for the parts and the assembly that they're going to be looking at. So in this case, we'll look at citizenship, country of affiliation, department, license, and security clearance. Here we'll see where we map these attributes based on the information that we have defined to the values that were in the Active Directory entries that we saw early. Now we're going to take a look at the different document classifications, and in this case the IP classification of what we specify within Teamcenter to go against those documents. Next, we'll take a look at the domain policies. Here we'll see that we've come up with 4 different policies based on what we had done for the controlled classified item and the value that's specified for it, and what they'll be able to access based on those policies that have been deployed within NextLabs to secure access to those files based on your rights to view or not be able to view them. We will start the demonstration by having Ed sign into SkyDRM. Once Ed's signed in, he's notified that he's now online. And now Ed can go in and also sign in from his desktop into Teamcenter as well. So he'll be signed into both SkyDRM locally on his desktop as well as signing into Teamcenter from that same desktop. Once Ed is into Teamcenter, he can load up and take a look at that transmission assembly that we spoke about earlier on that we'll be using during the demonstration. Here he can have a breakdown of the different components, and here we will see the IP classification. He can also go in and look at the properties itself in more detail and go down through, and here we'll see the IP classification that was specified, which, as you remember, we defined within policy to be used for users' access into these files if they're allowed or not allowed access. Ed will now take a look through the structure manager, and here we can see a breakdown of all the materials. In this case, we're going to see that as well as the IP classifications that are specified for each of these parts and the assembly itself. So here we can have a drop down, look at the values. He could change these up if need be, depending on the needs, as well as the NextLabs being able to protect that, which is one of the seamless integrations between Teamcenter and SkyDRM. Here you can take a look at the full assembly of the transmission. He can now load up the NX client. In this case, we get the full view from the NX client of the transmission as well as the subassembly. So since Ed is in the headquarters, he has full access to the entire transmission and the subassembly, which you're seeing on the right-hand side. He can go in and look at the different rights that's been applied to it from NextLabs. So in this case, we're going to get a listing of information that'll show, based on each of these parts, what they can actually do with them. So in this case, view, print, save, so on and so forth. Or if a part's not protected, it also shows that as well. Ed can now go out and export this transmission assembly. In this case, he's exported to a local drive. And here we will see all the parts that are listed as well as the .nxl extension, which means that these are all protected by NextLabs. Here you can go out in NextLabs, view the file information for a particular part, and it'll show what's been applied. So view, print, reshare, save as. Again, you can look at different parts and show the different rights that are applied to each of these. He'll now go in and look at the subfolder of transmission casing so we can see other assembly parts and pieces that are available that have been downloaded. Now we're going to go out and sign in as Jin. If you remember, Jin is one of the users that's from China, from Acme China, and he's going to sign on to SkyDRM as well. And now he's going to take a look at those same parts that have been downloaded to that desktop. So in this case, when he views the information and tries to load it up, the SkyDRM viewer will show him what he has access to. So in this case, since he's from Acme China, he has a view of the case itself. So he doesn't get to see the entire assembly, just the case and the associated parts of that. Here we'll see that if he views another file, it'll load up and he can actually see a breakdown of the case components in the different pieces that make up the entire case assembly. But again, not being able to see the subassembly components since he doesn't have access to them. Here we'll see that he can go in unmanaged mode, so this way not connecting to the Teamcenter instance that Ed was on, and look at it through the NX client. So here he can do a view. It'll load up what he's chosen as far as a part or the assembly itself. And now we'll see that those are the files that he cannot view and cannot be opened, but he can view the case and all the components that make that part up that he has access to. And you'll see the other ones are grayed out. And the objects that he can view, he might have only read-only access to. And he can uncheck or check the ones that he can see, but the other ones will remain grayed out and he doesn't have the access to them. He can also look at the file rights here. And again, it's going to show the same thing that we saw earlier, where the ones that he can't see and the ones that he can see in this case are protected and what he has capabilities for those particular files that he could see. Now our last user, Sanjay, if you remember, Sanjay's from India LLC Acme. He's going to go out. He's logged in through SkyDRM desktop. And again, he can view and look at those parts through the SkyDRM viewer as well. But as you can see here, he can see the subassembly components. He does not see any part of the case because he doesn't have access to it. Here he can expand out the list again again sign in through the NX client in unmanaged mode and look at a particular part. When he opens it up, here we'll see that there are certain parts that are protected again because he doesn't have access to them, but he does have access to the ones that he's allowed based on policy decision that was made based on that user and the attributes of both the files as well as what was defined within Active Directory. So here he can see that subassembly but can't see any of the case. So here, based on the three users looking at the same files, have different views of what they can and cannot view, and that's all based on SkyDRM and its ability to protect certain parts of the assembly from users and them having the ability to access it. And here we'll see Sanjay at the end being able to use the SkyDRM viewer and view the subassembly component. That concludes our demonstration. Thank you for your time.